One of the biggest challenges in oil painting is knowing how to soften an edge. Hard edges can make a painting feel too sharp or unnatural. Mastering soft edges brings depth, atmosphere, and realism to your work. Today I'm going to show you 3 essential techniques for softening an edge. First we have wet on wet blending, then we have cross contour knitting, finally halftone mixing. And to really break it down, I'll be demonstrating each of these approaches in a painting. Let's dive in. There are 3 different ways that I usually use to soften an edge. I'm going to show you right in here. I thought using the ear would be a great example. So the first one that I like to do is so this light is going to go into this shadow, right? So all this paint is already dry. So I'm mixing up the halfway point and kind of knitting in the shape here with hatching, coming in with some flake white to knit across that form. The ear is a great example because it's got a lot of hard and soft edges within it. So I thought it'd be a cool example here to show. Now I already have drawing of red, which is kind of a mid-tone between the light here and the dark. And so even in this area, we have an area that's very light, very dark. So one of the ways that I like to soften this edge here is to do it in a step. So what I mean by that is that we have our light value, our dark value. What is our value in between? So I want to mix up the mid-tone between this light and this dark. So I did that. I kind of mixed in a little bit of burnt umber, which is right here, into my mix that I already have. I have this kind of family of colors I'm working with. I call that my puddle. I call the puddle on my palette my family, because there's moves more towards orange this way, moves more towards lighter this way. This is going to move more towards burnt umber. So there's kind of branches from this family tree here that I like to think of. And so we come in, and I actually see this is getting kind of darker on this edge. This is too light right now, but I'm kind of redrawing some of this edge. And it kind of gets warm up against here on the ear. Now this was a demo that I started from life in Scottsdale when I was teaching. So this was a painting that I wanted to bring into the studio and could just kind of finish off a little bit. So again, finding that midpoint value, because this is because this is dry and this is dry, finding that midpoint I think is the hardest way to soften an edge, but also probably the best way to do it, because you're challenging yourself to be able to mix better. Now as I look in there, I'm like, that's pretty good. I can even go just slightly darker in another step as this turns into that dark. So a little bit more burnt umber. Up against this edge. This pulls down, kind of redrawing a little bit here. This shape comes up to about there probably. Now I'm just kind of using my memory here on what I know. I'm just using a quick iPhone photo that I took of the model, Alejandro. Amazing model in Scottsdale. And actually hired him to use photos of him for a workshop that Shana and I are giving in Italy this summer. So we're doing a workshop on working from the photo, and it's going to be a class that's about using the photo, but also thinking about how the negative aspects of photos for painting, also the positive aspects of photos for painting, versus working from life positive aspects of working from life and the negative aspects from working from life. You know, I feel like there's not just one way of working. I think that we can use one. Working from life really helps us to see things better and understand where the photograph is kind of using a lens versus how we see. And so edges can be kind of weird with a photo, but then also working from life can be a little limited in who you paint. So the idea of the workshop is to kind of show you guys how we take photo reference. We're going to be the workshop's going to be us working on aspects of painting from the photo. And Alejandra is going to be one of the models. So I'm just coming around. I see this gets a little bit more pinched than I have it. And so I'm darkening up this edge right here. Okay, so this comes up and around. This part gets thinner and drops lower to about there. That looks pretty good. I'm thinking that this gets a little warmer in there as well. Coming in here and again softening up this edge. Now that's another way that I soften my edges, is just wet into wet, right? Just using a dry brush technique of moving one edge of value into another value. That's a less sophisticated way, I feel, but within broad areas like this, it works. And hatching. So there's the hatching method, where I knit shapes into one another across the form. There's the wet on wet, kind of using a dry brush to go across the edge. And then there's finding that mid-tone value between one value and another value. Stepping it. And then I can even kind of come in, and a lot of it, these methods can be used together. So I notice that this gets a little darker here. Not quite that dark. Coming in with a little bit of flake white into my mix to kind of hit this as it turns. Soften that out. Then it gets darker as the shape turns away from the light. Alejandra is a great model. It's funny, when I do demos from life, I never get to finish the ears. So this will be fun. Now, I'm going to come in from the dark side to shape up from the hair side. And as I look at this shape, looks pretty good, pretty good, pretty good. Comes up to here. I'm just putting that as a note for myself. The space from here to here looks pretty good. Could get pushed in a little bit more. A little bit more. And then this turn is a little bit better. I'm being really fastidious on getting this shape right. For me, doing a study like this is about accuracy. It's training my eye to see better. Not necessarily about making a great painting right now. For me, it's about doing a great demo for you guys to impart information, but then also just training my eye so that my paintings that I do of the Holocaust survivors that I paint and the amazing people I paint are better paintings for it. This comes down and over. Looks pretty good. This part of the ear gets a little thinner. Cool. So I'm always wiping my brush in between my mixers as well to kind of keep my color from getting muddy. Come in here. I see this gets a lot darker and maybe a little bit of cad orange as well. Just going to check the audio. Test, test, test. Cool. Now there's highlights on this part of the ear as well. So I'm going to actually go even darker on this side than what I think it's going to be. that edge right there is going to get a little softer. And there's a little bit of softness on this edge right here as well. So I'm going to use that kind of wet into wet technique and just soften that out with the dry brush. Up here though, I'm stepping into the value. Here, because I'm using a wet into wet technique, I can just soften that. And there's different degrees of softness within an edge that I'm achieving. A little bit of medium to make this paint a little bit more fluid. Now, talking about that idea of knitting over the form, this edge is really soft, which means this needs to go darker and this needs to go a little lighter just to mix that edge as we kind of lose it on there, on that side of the ear. So I'm hatching across the contour. So this would be, contours are borders of forms. And so I'm mixing across that border of the form right there. And just coming in and hatching over top of the edge. Cross contouring. So there's that cross contour aspect of softening an edge. And I love the color that's actually on the brush. And I see it through here. It's a little bit greener. And then I kind of want to soften this edge as well. So I'm going to use that mixture that we have, kind of bring that in. You can go a slight bit darker. This comes over. And in here, this gets a little darker as well, where this edge gets a little harder right through there. This shape in the middle here is really beautiful. I feel like it's got green undertones. So kind of moving into this cinnabar green light. This cuts in over like this way. And again, because we have wet into wet going in this area already, we have paint already laid down. We can knit first and then take our brush, clean our brush so we have a dry brush, and soften out what these edges are doing in here. And I see a little bit more, what I call like heat, chroma happening in here. So I'm going into the permanent bright red. Might be too intense, but we'll see. You know, I kind of like the intensity of chroma within the ears because it's usually light reflecting through the cartilage of the ear, which is why ears tend to be a little bit more chromatic. This comes over. I'm going to move in towards a little bit of the burnt umber again with the permanent bright red, because I see it gets a little darker on this edge here. Again, softening out that little note that we had from earlier. This comes up and over. This movement in here, so I see this light, and then I see this dark kind of pulls in this direction. A little bit of that red again to soften up this edge. This is me finding the mid-tone now between where that light is and where this dark is, because this edge is soft, but then gets harder as it pulls around. And so finding that middle point and also kind of hatching that in, stroking it over, just kind of moving towards that knitting shape across the contour. This gets a little lighter than the dark that's around it, these shapes, and then this shape dips in and over. Now this painting of Alejandro, I'm actually going to auction this. I'm actually raffling this painting off on a site called Raffle, and I have all the details in the description below. $25 a ticket. Just trying out this platform of being able to raffle off artwork in the future. And so I thought it'd be cool I'm going to probably do drawings on there, art materials. I think it'd be kind of a fun little platform for auctioning off art materials that I have that maybe I don't use. Maybe $1 a ticket for a paint tube or something. You never know if you're going to win. Hatching in some color there. Just being very broad right now. Now let's go back to this edge on that dark, cleaning my brush off. I feel like if I squint, this gets even darker. This gets darker through here. Now when I hatch, I want to hatch with the contour of the form. And so light, dark, I want to soften up that edge and think about how it's turning into the dark. Just coming across and knitting across just a little bit. Cutting across, and I see a little bit more light kind of emerging out of the side right through here. Using a little bit of the Naples yellow to kind of bring up the value. And it might be too light, but we're using this kind of as we're redrawing a little bit here. Redrawing the tonality, right? The values and placement of areas within the ear. And then we can come back and think about color a little later. I mean, we're trying to get accurate color, but I think it's much easier for you guys to think about value and edges first, and then to think color on top of that. This comes down. Take my brush, and again, I'm going to dry brush this edge into that dark on that edge right there. And we almost kind of lose this edge of the ear into the shadow side behind his head. And so I want to bring in a value that's a lot darker as well. Because I feel like this is a good mid-tone. Now where this kind of comes up and over, this part of the ear gets a little thicker. It's looking good. So I'm going to take my brush again, and I'm going to knit one value into another value, and just over the whole thing, just to slightly push everything and unify it with a cross contour stroke. Gets a little lighter through here, just knitting in some value. I want to get this dark real quick. A little bit of red umber would be great, I think. I feel it, it might be, it's funny, I feel like this area right here, because of the overhang and the shadow that's being caused by the light, by the outside edge of the ear, is making it darker, but then also there's a little bit of heat, like we were talking about before. And hatch in some of, get rid of that, and a little bit of the cadmium orange throughout here. Now, there's an edge here and an edge here. This edge is too sharp, and so I'm going to take my brush again. We're going to use the dry brush technique to pull the dark and light together. I'm actually going to get a bigger brush. Somewhat bigger brush. Just a softer brush that has some give to it. What I mean by give is that it kind of is very gentle. And I'm just going to go and merge these areas. Again, this is the softening of these edges by using wet into wet. Softening up that edge. Softening up this edge. Softening where the light is pulling into the dark. So I want to darken some of this area through here. This is kind of a drawing line. So I'm going to come in, put a little bit of medium in with this mix. And look at it looks a little bit, well, see a little bit light right through here. The earlobe actually has an earring on it. I'm going to just kind of pretend like there's not. You can still see some of the underpainting of the earring. Thinking about this edge as well. Gets a little darker. Now in here, a little greener, a little darker. I'm going to come in here and shape out the light of the shadow here. How this kind of comes into this part of the lobe and how it attaches to the skin. Really, really cool. Might be too light in areas, might be too dark in areas. So let's check it. Come in with some red umber, and then kind of shaping out what's going on in this shadow shape. This is really cool because it's actually dark on this side, right through here, and then it lightens up a little bit. So it lightens up very similarly to what's going on here. I see moves, it gets a little hotter, the chroma. And fade that in, just tap, tap, tap. See what's going on with this shape. Looks pretty good. Now we have this hard edge here that I'm going to step down, do that method where I'm finding the halftone between this and the light. And I feel like that's close to it. And so putting that on there brings it up. And it's gently also kind of dry brushing it next to the paint that we put down there. So it's kind of a hybrid method. Getting some raw sienna in our mix. As this pulls down, going over top of this edge, that was a drawing edge. Gets a lot lighter as it passes through here. Here it gets a little warmer. So many different qualities to the edges within the ear. It's really beautiful. It's a great feature to demo for edges. Getting a little lighter through here. Tapping in the light. Even lighter even. So we have our kind of mixture here, our puddle, a little bit of Naples yellow in there. That comes down over to about here. Softening that out. Now it's going back in here. Super dark, little green. Terravert green cool, raw sienna. See what that vibe is. It's kind of a swampy green. Gonna tap that in over top of the line that we have. I think it's still too light, but it gives us a good undertone, color that we can work on top of to get closer. And we have another edge. And we have another edge that I want to soften and figure out, which is this edge right here. So I feel like that's too light. So I'm going to think about stepping it down again. What's the halfway point between this and this? This is pretty dark. It's a red umber base with a little bit of the permanent bright red. So finding this mid-tone between here and there looks pretty good. Then it gets really kind of darker through here. Checking the audio. Okay. We have a little bit of a line that passes through this way. And this edge right here, this shape blends in gently. So we're just kind of hatching in a little bit of color that's a little darker on that edge as well. And then softening out what's going on here with that edge. Come back, squint. That looks pretty good. Now let's think about what's going on with this curve right here. I see it's a little hotter and brighter. A little bit, I'm going to use a little bit of flake white just to kind of bring it up just a little bit. And I see it gets a little bit more towards a burnt sienna. And this heat, the chroma of it, which is kind of more muted, kind of goes up through the shadow of the ear on this side, which is very delicate. Again, softening up this edge as it meets that dark. As we pull into this curve, right through here, what is this shape doing? It looks pretty good. Kind of thinking about the redraw as well. This comes down and over, and then we have this funnel shape right here. Checking it out. This gets a little lighter through here. Hatching in a little bit of that color. And on this edge, I'm going to just go over the edge. This gets a little bit lighter and curves over a little bit. I feel like it's a little bit more yellow though. Moving more towards a little bit of that yellow ochre. I think it's a little lighter on this edge as this turns. Excuse me. Softening out this. What's going on in the shadow? The funnel of the ear. Again, softening this out just a little bit. It's a little bit of heat on this edge as well. Just going to make that kind of turn gently to about there. Soften this out kind of with a dry brush and tap that in to what I see as it fits. See a little bit of kind of a green passage kind of coming through here. There's a little light, so we'll kind of darken that just a little bit. This part up here gets a little darker, a little darker and redder all through this part of his side of his cheek. Stepping back and squinting, it might be a little light. Kind of carrying that forward. Knitting this color on top of here, so we get a good sense of broken color. Not just trying to fill a whole area in with the same color, but almost thinking about a broken lattice so that color can come through and we can bring color on top of this layer. So not trying to overblend it completely. Have some of my hatch marks and movements, as you can see, through the face. But then when I transition to this gets darker there, so we have a good sense of the values shaping up here. Okay, might be a little too light. I'm gonna move more towards a red umber. I like to use my umbers to darken skin tones because they're more natural. Softening that out as it comes over. Overlapping some of the hatch that we had here earlier. As I sit back, I like to lean back every now and then to look at what I'm working on. I see that this area gets a little bit more fuller in the drawing, so I lean back and squint, essentially. Softening this edge, and because it's wet and wet right now, using a dry brush to soften that lobe edge right there. All right, so soft edge. A little bit of a harder edge. Curious about what's going on in there. I feel like it moves more towards a Capucine red light. It's got a little bit of heat, chroma. This comes up and over. This edge right through here, again, very hard. So how do we attack that? Finding the midpoint color between here and here. Midtones, halftones, they have different names for them. This edge also is really hard, right in here. So I'm going to come in kind of with that same color. Actually a little darker, a little bit of red umber between this dark here, which is a red, this is a raw umber through here. And so I do like actually in between the two. So we can, it takes a while to kind of get it, hopefully, which is good. Softening up that edge with that color. Carrying that through here as well. I feel like this can be a little bit better drawn. So I'm going to go a little bit on the dark with a little bit of raw umber. Yeah, and a little bit of red umber here because there's a little bit of a shadow of the earlobe. I'm trying to ignore that he had his earring. Put that on after the fact if we want to. This comes up and it kind of straighter through here. And we kind of want to delicately tap that edge with our brush. It gets a little greener and lighter through here. going to bring in some of that yellow ochre at the top here with a little bit of Naples yellow. Think about the subtlety in the lobe. I'm going to start bringing up a little bit of the light. This has a movement like this. Just fix the drawing just a little bit here. Softening that edge. The light comes up and over like this. Man, ears are so much fun to paint. This edge gets softened. Then it gets a little slightly harder through here. There's a lot of edge condition to think about. Edge condition is that you can have the same, you can have an outside edge of the ear, but here it's softer, here it's harder. Or here it's harder, here it's softer. So along the edge of a contour, it can have different attributes. Softer, harder, darker, lighter. It's not just the same hard edge that you would have from a certain camera angle or lens that you're using or focus length that you would have in a camera. This gets lighter through here, maybe not that light, but I want it to have a little bit more chroma as well. This edge is a little bit harder because it's a cast shadow from the upper part of the ear. And it gets lighter as it hits this form. Softening up this edge as well, so mixed up that color to be the softness between these two. Darkening up this part of the ear just a little bit, gently. Stepping back and looking, looks pretty good. I want to bring in some of the orange tonalities that are coming in, that are sneaking in through here. That once we put that down there, we can then take a dry brush and think about how this is curving into that edge with the form onto that light and what we just put down. I'm overpainting this edge right here. Just going to pull a dark in over top of it, basically on this, in this area. So it gets a little darker. And so pulling in that dark, it's kind of nice because I like that hard edge right there. Kind of shaping up the ear. This gets a little darker. In here, what's going on with this edge? It's not that hard, just to put that in. Now let's soften that out. And then what's going on in this area? It looks pretty good. I feel like this is a little lighter, but not as light as I have it now. Just reshaping up the drawing more so. That looks pretty good. And then this comes down and over. This gets lighter through here. Lighter through here. I'm going to sneak in some softening up this edge because it's wet right now. Wet in the wet edge. Softening it with the form as this funnel kind of turns. Let's use some of this dark and dissipate it. And this curve right through here. Soften that edge. Dry brushing over top of this edge. Now, kind of played around with the lights on here. Let's go back into the dark a little bit. So I'm going to come into the dark now with a little bit of ultramarine blue into my mix. Gives us a nice dark. A little bit more. A little bit of warm. So I see a little bit of dark, a little dark wedge through here. And then it comes in. Now I'm painting pretty much wet into wet at this point. This comes down, softening up that edge by just going over top of it gently. This is all soft edges through pressure. I see that there's a cast shadow of this part of the ear that's making this a little darker. Come up to here. What's going on from this space to this space? So the drawing gets a little bit better as this shape pulls over more. This gets darker, softening up this edge. This is way too light. It stands out now. It stands out now because we see context. We're starting to get more context in the drawing and the painting. Context is basically figuring out areas that are around it in value and color. And so we're starting to see where our drawing can be better, where our values and color can be better as we go. Kind of reshaping out what's going on there. I'm going to step back. This gets a little darker through here. This gets warmer and darker. I'm going to add these two together as it starts to get dark, dark, dark. Darker is this curve as well. Get a little bit more warm in there. A little bit of the cadmium orange. Get the value in the chroma down. Higher chroma, darker value. This area gets a little lighter. Wiping my brush. I think this is a little bit darker. More towards a raw sienna. Yeah. Test that out. Could even go a little darker. And darken with a little bit of burnt umber. It's much better, but I still think it can go even a little darker. A little bit more dark and heat on this soft edge right here. This edge gets a little lighter. Softening up what's going on here in the ear. Darkening this as well. I'm going to put this brush down. I'm going to go in with a softer brush just to soften out edges and values, just mush them together. That's a technical term, mush them. By going over it like this, I'm still kind of keeping intact the hard edges that I want, but then just slightly softening, and it's just a very light touch here. Wiping the brush as well. Going to kind of shape out what's going on here with a dry brush, softening. This area gets a lot darker. If something goes into the shadow, I want that edge to be even softer. Right through there. Through this edge right here. This shape right here comes up and over just a little bit with this brush. Oh, that's beautiful. Starting to come together. Stepping back. Thinking about what's going on with the dark here, how this edge right here kind of melds into the hairline. Again, going with a little bit of ultramarine blue, a little bit of burnt sienna. It's like my first choice. Seeing how that sits. Much better, yeah, it's great dark. Just hits on that edge. There's like a triangle of shadow wedged through here. So just kind of blocking that all in with this soft brush. Using just the top part of the brush to meld over this edge. Meets over the lobe. How's that pull down? Need a little bit more. Looks pretty good. As I'm squinting now, I see that this could be even a little bit darker. So I'm just going to kind of tap in a little bit whatever was on my brush. Sometimes we feel like we don't have to pick a color, we can just will it to be the right color. I don't know if that's true. I'm sure like you guys have all been in that place where you feel kind of not lazy, but kind of lazy. You're like, I don't need to put in that tube on that color on my palette. It's dried out. I can work without it. And you kind of like figure out these workarounds as you go. I guess you can learn that way with a limited palette sometimes. That edge, I'm gonna come in with a dark through here, just soften up. Thinking about the hairline, how it's melding into the skin. Very soft edge, very subtle. And how it's over here, this top part of the ear, which is actually a hard edge. So hard edge, slightly in between hard edge, soft, really soft, and slightly harder edged here, but I feel like this could be even warmer. Probably paint on here a little bit longer, but I think that gives you guys an idea of all the different approaches I take to edges. Different approaches I take to, some are hybrid, use a little bit of both, or all three, just to create a sense of depth and edge control. Awesome. And that's how you can control your edges in oil painting, using wet on wet blending, cross contour knitting, and halftone mixing. I hope these techniques help you take your work to the next level. This demo painting actually is up for Raffle right now online. So if you'd like a chance to own it, check out the link in the description. I want to send a huge thank you to all the artists supporting this channel on Patreon. Just $5 a month gets you access to all the behind the scenes content. If you're interested in joining that community, there's a link below as well. If you found this helpful, hit that like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what other painting topics you guys want to see. Thanks again for watching, and as always, paint well, guys. Take care.